There is a secret that Washington does not want you to know, a secret that keeps the top executives of the world's most powerful oil companies awake at night, a secret that could shift the balance of power across the entire American hemisphere. And that secret has a name. Mexico has just declared an economic war on the United States, and it is winning. What Claudia Sheinbaum did just 3 weeks ago in December 2025 is something no Mexican president had dared to do in almost 100 years. She permanently shut the door on U.S. oil ambitions. And the most shocking part is that Washington can do absolutely nothing to stop her. Nothing. Zero. Lawyers reviewed it. Strategists analyzed it. Generals studied it. The final conclusion is devastating for the United States. Mexico holds all the winning cards. My name is Ricardo Wolf. I am an economist and professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts. For 40 years, I have studied power relations between the United States and Latin America. I have witnessed coups, military interventions, and economic blockades. I have documented how U.S. imperialism destroyed entire economies. But what is happening right now has no precedent. For the first time in modern history, a Latin American country has the United States backed into a corner, and that country is Mexico. Let me explain why Donald Trump is furious, why the CEOs of Chevron and ExxonMobil are in panic, and why the State Department called emergency meetings at midnight. The reason is simple but crushing. Mexico controls something the United States desperately needs and cannot get from any nearby source. Oil. Not just any oil, Mexican oil. 100,000 barrels per day that keep refineries in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi running. Now listen carefully, because here comes the truly explosive part. The new reforms that Sheinbaum signed establish that 80% of Mexico's oil production must be processed by PEMEX or by Mexican state-owned companies. Do you understand what this means? U.S. corporations that invested billions of dollars are now facing a brutal reality. Either they accept being minority partners of the Mexican government, or they leave the country with nothing. Legally, they cannot do anything to stop it. But wait, this is only the beginning. What my sources inside the Mexican government revealed to me is even more shocking. Mexico is not only closing the door to U.S. oil companies, Mexico is opening the door to China. In November 2025, just 1 month before the reforms, a Chinese delegation visited Mexico City in secret. No press releases, no official ceremonies. Executives from Sinopec, China's state oil company, met with officials from Mexico's Ministry of Energy. The topic was a 20-year oil agreement worth $150 billion. Imagine the scene in Washington when they found out. Trump had just begun his second term, promising to dominate energy in the hemisphere, promising that Mexico would kneel before the United States. And suddenly, he discovers that Mexico is about to sign the largest oil deal in its history with its number one geopolitical rival. The humiliation is complete. The sense of powerlessness is total. Now I will tell you what happened in the secret National Security Council meeting 2 weeks ago. A meeting so classified that only 5 people were present. President Trump, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, the Secretary of Energy, and a general from Northern Command. They were presented with a 120-page report analyzing options to respond to Mexico. And every single option, without exception, ended in the same place. Guaranteed failure. The first option was a 25% tariff on Mexican products. The problem is obvious. That would trigger inflation in the United States at a time when Trump's voters are already angry about high prices. Experts calculated that the average cost of a car would rise by $8,000. Avocado prices would triple. Construction companies would stop operating because Mexican steel would become too expensive. Politically, it would be suicide. The second option was to block exports of refined gasoline to Mexico. Again, a problem. Mexico already saw this coming. The Dos Bocas refinery, built by López Obrador and expanded by Sheinbaum, can process 340,000 barrels per day. Mexico is rapidly reducing its dependence on U.S. fuel. Within 2 years, it could be completely self-sufficient. The third option was legal pressure through the trade agreement between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. Lawyers at the Department of Commerce reviewed every clause for 72 straight hours, searching for a violation. The result was clear. Mexico is not breaking any part of the agreement. It has full sovereign rights to define its energy policy. End of story. The fourth option was diplomatic pressure through international organizations. This is where it gets brutal. Mexico presented its case before the Organization of American States, the United Nations, and international arbitration bodies. All reached the same conclusion. Mexico is legitimately exercising its sovereignty over natural resources. The United States has no legal basis to object. When Trump heard all of this, according to someone who was in the room, he remained silent for 3 full minutes. 3 minutes that felt endless. Then he asked the obvious question. What if we invade? The Northern Command General answered with a single word: catastrophe. Mexico has a 130 million people and shares a 3,000-kilometer border with the United States. An invasion would create the largest refugee crisis in history, destabilize all of Latin America, destroy what remains of U.S. credibility in the world, and on top of that, Mexico would burn its oil wells before allowing the United States to take them. This is the Cardenas Doctrine, established in 1938. Better to destroy the oil than hand it to an invader. Now, let me tell you something that changes the entire game. Mexico has 6 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That alone is significant. But there is something the Mexican government has kept quiet for years. Geological studies in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico indicate potential reserves of 20 billion barrels. 20 billion barrels. One of the largest oil deposits discovered in recent decades. And Sheinbaum has just ensured that it remains under absolute Mexican control. U.S. companies knew this. That is why they invested billions. That is why they pressured Peña Nieto to open the energy sector in 2013. It was never about the current production of 1.8 million barrels per day. It was about the 20 billion barrels sitting below the surface, waiting to be extracted. And now that treasure is out of their reach forever. But here comes Mexico's master move. It is not only shutting the door on the United States, it is building alliances with all of its competitors. China is already involved, as I mentioned, but this story does not end there. There are also advanced talks with Russia, with Norway, with Brazil, and with European oil companies that are eager to enter the Mexican market. Mexico is building a system where no single country can apply excessive pressure. It is the perfect diversification strategy. And there is more. The agreement with China includes something truly groundbreaking. China would pay for Mexican oil not in dollars, but in yuan. Do you understand how big this is? The dollar is the world's reserve currency, mainly because oil is sold in dollars. If Mexico, the second largest oil supplier to China after Saudi Arabia, starts selling oil in yuan, other countries will follow. Venezuela has already shown interest. Brazil is studying the option. The dominance of the dollar, built over 80 years since Bretton Woods, would begin to weaken. Inside the U.S. Treasury, there is real fear. Janet Yellen, when she was Treasury Secretary, warned that de-dollarization was the biggest risk to the U.S. economy, bigger than inflation, bigger than the deficit, bigger than national debt. Because if the dollar loses its reserve currency status, the United States loses the ability to print money without inflationary consequences. It loses the ability to finance its massive trade deficit. It loses its main tool of global economic power. Now, I want you to understand something essential. This did not start with Sheinbaum. It began 6 years ago when Andrés Manuel López Obrador came to power in 2018. AMLO quietly started reversing oil privatization, strengthened PEMEX, and canceled unfavorable contracts. He built the Dos Bocas refinery despite heavy criticism from neoliberal economists. Washington protested. Oil companies threatened retaliation, but AMLO did not back down. He was preparing the ground. When Sheinbaum took office in October 2024, many analysts thought she would soften the direction, that she would be more pragmatic pragmatic and more willing to negotiate with the United States. They were completely wrong. Sheinbaum is more radical than AMLO. She is an engineer. She deeply understands the oil industry, and she has something AMLO did not have: an even stronger political coalition and a perfect geopolitical moment. Let me explain the timing. Trump has returned to power with a confrontational agenda toward China. Europe is divided and weakened by the war in Ukraine. The Middle East remains unstable, and Russia is isolated. In this environment, Mexico emerges as a key geopolitical player, a country capable of tipping the balance to either side. And Mexico is using that power with impressive skill. 3 days ago, Sheinbaum gave a speech at the National Palace that U.S. media ignored, but it was historic. She said, and I quote, "Mexico will never again be an economic colony of any power. Our oil is ours, our future is ours, and anyone who wants to do business with us will do so under our terms or not at all." The applause lasted 5 full minutes. Do you know what is most remarkable? The Mexican population strongly supports this position. Polls show that 87% of Mexicans approve of oil nationalization. This is not just a government project, it is a national project, and that gives Sheinbaum a level of legitimacy that no external pressure can break. Now, let me tell you what will happen in the coming months, because this is only the beginning. In February, there will be a trilateral meeting of energy ministers from Mexico, the United States, and Canada. It will be explosive. The United States will pressure, threaten, and try to intimidate. Mexico will not give up a single inch. Canada, caught in the middle, will likely lean toward Mexico because it is also tired of U.S. arrogance. In March, Mexico will formally finalize the agreement with China. It will be the largest trade deal in Latin American history, worth $150 billion over 20 years. China will build port infrastructure, refineries, and pipelines. It will bring cutting-edge drilling technology and, most importantly, offer guaranteed prices that protect Mexico from oil market volatility. By June, we will see the first concrete results. Mexican production will rise. Government oil revenues will surge. Investment in education, healthcare, and infrastructure will multiply. Mexico will prove that its model works, that economic sovereignty is not a romantic dream, but a practical strategy. And here is what truly terrifies Washington. If Mexico succeeds, other countries will copy it. Venezuela is already studying the Mexican model. Bolivia is interested. Ecuador is watching closely. Imagine a Latin American bloc of oil-producing countries that control their own resources, sell in yuan or in their own currencies, and reject the conditions of the IMF and the World Bank. That would mark the end of the system the United States built after World War II. That is why Washington is desperate, why emergency meetings are being called, and why they are looking for any way to destabilize Sheinbaum. But they face a serious problem. Mexico is no longer the Mexico of 1950 or 1980. It is an economy worth nearly $2 trillion. It is the 5th largest economy in the world. It has trade agreements with 46 countries and a middle class of 50 million people. You cannot simply overthrow a government like that without catastrophic consequences. Let me be very clear about something. This does not mean Mexico will become a superpower overnight. It still has major problems: drug violence, corruption, inequality, and poverty. But for the first time in decades, it has an economic strategy that does not depend on kneeling before Washington, and that is revolutionary. Now, I want to address what you are probably thinking. What about the oil companies that already invested in Mexico? Do they lose everything? No, they do not. The reforms give them 2 options. First, they can partner with PEMEX as minority partners. They will still make money, but they will no longer control strategic decisions. Second, they can sell their operations to Mexican or Chinese companies. Many will choose the first option because something is better than nothing, but the humiliation is clear. Chevron, which once bragged that Mexico had finally come to its senses with the 2013 reform, now has to accept being a junior partner to the Mexican government. ExxonMobil, which dreamed of dominating the Gulf of Mexico, now sees those plans disappear. ConocoPhillips, which invested billions in exploration, now faces a simple choice: share control or leave. And let me tell you something very few people know. In January 2025, this story takes an even more dramatic turn. Just before Trump took office, a group of oil executives went to Mar-a-Lago. They explained the situation in Mexico and asked him to make it an absolute priority. Trump promised that he would force Mexico to reverse its reforms. 3 weeks later, when his advisors told him there was no legal way to do that, Trump had one of his well-known angry outbursts. He threw papers, shouted, made threats, but in the end, he had to accept reality. Mexico won that fight. Now ask yourself, is there anything else you need to understand about why the United States cannot simply invade or destabilize Mexico the way it has done with many other countries? Mexico has something unique: proximity. The two countries share a 3,200-kilometer border. There are 11 million Mexicans living in the United States. There are also millions of Americans living in Mexico. Bilateral trade is over $600 billion a year. The economies are so deeply connected that destabilizing Mexico would also destabilize the United States. This situation has no real precedent. Usually, when the United States wants to overthrow a government, that country is far away. Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba are thousands of kilometers distant. You can apply sanctions, you can fund opposition groups, you can wait and apply pressure over time. But with Mexico, everything is different. If Mexico were to collapse, Texas, California, Arizona, and New Mexico would collapse with it. The migration crisis would be beyond imagination. Chaos would spill immediately into U.S. territory. Mexico knows this. Sheinbaum knows this as well, and he is using that reality as a shield. It is a brilliant form of geopolitical defense. You do not need nuclear weapons or massive military bases when your geography makes you essential to your most powerful neighbor. Now let me look ahead, because I know you want to understand what comes next. In the next 5 years, Mexico will strengthen its control over oil. PEMEX will be modernized. Production will slowly increase, and the income will be invested in infrastructure and social development. A new generation of Mexican technicians and engineers specialized in oil will emerge. In 10 years, Mexico could be producing 2.5 million barrels a day. Deep water reserves will begin to be exploited. Mexico will become an even more important oil player, and most importantly, it will have proven that a Latin American country can maintain economic sovereignty in the 21st century. This will inspire an entire generation. Young Latin Americans who grew up hearing that there was no alternative to neoliberalism will see that there is one. They will see that natural resources can be controlled by their own countries, that economic independence is possible. The psychological and political impact will be enormous. Of course, there will be obstacles. The United States will not give up easily. They will try everything: propaganda, funding opposition groups, pressure through international institutions. But every time they fail, Mexico will come out stronger. Each failed attempt at intimidation is proof that the empire has limits. And here's the deepest truth I want you to understand. Oil is power, and it has always been power. Many of the wars of the 20th century were in large part wars over oil. The Middle East has been torn apart because of oil. Latin America was exploited for its oil. Whoever controls oil controls the fate of entire nations. What Mexico is doing now is taking that control back. It is saying that its oil does not belong to multinational corporations, but to the Mexican people. This is a fundamental act of sovereignty, and that is why Washington is afraid. Because if Mexico can do it, anyone can. Let me end with this. We are witnessing a historic moment, one that will be studied in universities for decades. The moment when a Latin American country said no to U.S. hegemony and came out victorious. The moment when the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere began to shift. I do not know if you are Mexican, Latin American, American, or from anywhere else in the world, but we should all pay attention, because what is happening in Mexico is not just about oil. It is about dignity. It is about the rights of nations. Yeah, of